What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Random Redshirt Podcast. I am Zach, one of your hosts, and with me, as always, is the other host, Chris. What's going on, Chris?
Hello, Zach. As always, great to see you. Great to be here. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us around the world. Just awesome to be here and talk about the things we love. Talk about Star Trek. Talk about Star Trek Voyager, which we're going to do today. It's going to be excellent and so much looking forward to it. So, yeah, I know you are
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, anytime we talk Trek, I look forward to it. I mean, I look forward to all of our episodes, but Trek's got a special place, so it's going to be fun. We're going to have a good time. This is season 4 of our podcast, and so for those of you who have been listening from the beginning or may have gone back and listened to previous episodes, you may have noticed a little bit of a trend in our podcast. Each season of our show, we have gone through and reviewed, talked about, discussed kind of a wave top approach to each series within the Star Trek franchise. So, for example, our first season of the podcast, we started in order and started with the original series. And then when Next Gen and season 2, season 3, DS9, and of course now here season 4, we have reached the 4th installment in the Star Trek franchise, Chris, and that is Star Trek Voyager.
Yeah. What a bold adventure and kind of a this whole idea Star Trek Voyager was. I mean, they took a lot of they really took the series in a completely different direction, completely different area,
Quite literally, yeah.
literally and figuratively. So,
Yeah.
um, just great job, and I thought an original direction they did for sure. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Certainly not. I don't know that this would have been a show just like DS9 that would have been created while Gene Roddenberry was alive. They took the franchise in a little bit of a different direction than I think Gene would have gone. And you can make arguments whether that's bad or good. I love the direction they went initially with obviously DS9. DS9 never would have been made probably with Gene Roddenberry still alive. So that being said, Voyager is certainly maybe the most unique or one of the most unique in the Star Trek franchise, right? Just because of where it takes place and kind of the idea behind it. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to talking about Voyager. We'll talk about some of our general thoughts of this series here in the first part of Voyager, and then we will dive into season 1 and 2 and kind of give some highlights as far as episodes that stood out to us.
yes, absolutely. That's gonna be great. That's gonna be fun.
Yeah. So let's dive in, Chris. Let's talk about Star Trek Voyager. We do have some incredible announcements coming down the pipeline for the podcast. If you listen to our previous episode where we talked with Mark and Erica from Shuttlepod Show, then you will know some of that. But if you haven't listened to that yet, please go back and listen to that where we talk about the Shuttlepod Show podcasts that they produce and host, and also co-host with Connor and Dominic from Enterprise, as well as the live event. They will kind of also hit again on this in this episode. Chris and I are going to be down in LA the weekend of Super Bowl Sunday to mingle with a variety of Star Trek actors. We're going to hopefully have some recording sessions for you that will air at a later date. And we're going to be bringing you some amazing content from that, Chris. I cannot wait to get down there. It'll be great to see you again in person, because the last time we were together in person was the Las Vegas Star Trek convention back in August of 2021.
Yeah, that was a moment ago, wasn't it? Yeah,
Yeah,
so
that
it's
was at
gonna
least a
be
minute ago. Yeah.
yeah, it's gonna be fantastic. We're going to enjoy it. It's gonna be just a great experiencing meeting everyone there. I'm really looking
Yeah.
forward to it. It's gonna be
We'll have
super
to,
exciting.
we'll have to share our overall thoughts of the actual event that they put together, the Shuttlepod Show puts together,
Yes.
on top of obviously the other interviews and stuff that we'll hopefully have. We look forward to sharing that. If you already listened to the episode we just did with Mark and Erica, then not Eric, Erica, then we'll get some of those details. If you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to it. But we are here to talk about Star Trek Voyager, aren't we, Chris? And
Yes.
this is the 4th installment in the greatest sci-fi franchise of all time, Star Trek. It first aired.
Whoa.
I know, I
You
know.
slipped that in there.
Oh yeah, well, I slipped that in there. Yep, that's true. Yeah, I sure did. But this is the first. The series first aired January 16th, 1995 on UPN. That was a newer ish channel that was around back in the mid 90s. network, I guess. We can talk about some of that later, whether that was a good decision or not to bring it to UPN. But it went on there with a pilot episode, The Caretaker. Now, I would, this is definitely falls into what I would consider that classic Trek, right? We've talked about this before in the podcast, the original series through Enterprise. That's, for me personally, what I would consider classic Trek. And then anything after Enterprise, I would consider modern Trek. It's definitely unique from the other shows, and that Voyager has propelled 70,000 light years into the Delta Quadrant and spent 7 seasons trying to get back home to the Alpha Quadrant. It is the first series to follow a crew away from the Federation, and everything we've known about Star Trek up to Voyager, Chris, is completely different because they're so far away from home. They're not around the Federation. They don't have help in the sense that you would on the Enterprise, or even, to some extent, DS9. And this series followed along with DS9 for about 5 seasons. So DS9 premiered in 1993, I believe it was. And then DS9 came, or Voyager came on in 1995. So I think it was about the time season 3 kicked off of DS9 is when Voyager would have aired, somewhere along that time period. So we've got a little table setting there. And this is a great series. There are people, I have friends who, some people bash Voyager. They just don't like it. There's a lot of things they don't like about it. We'll get into some of our thoughts as we go along. And, for those of you listening to this, we'll be curious on your thoughts and what you think of Star Trek Voyager up to this point. But this is going to be great. We're going to jump into this and get talking about a little Voyager, Chris.
Yeah, it is going to be, it is going to be awesome. I mean, what a refreshing and kind of promising premise Voyager had completely in the first place. Because you're right, they were in a completely different quadrant of the galaxy, the Delta Quadrant, away from the Alpha Quadrant, and a complete blank slate for the creators of the show to have as much creativity as they wanted. Like in the Alpha Quadrant and in TNG and in the original Star Trek, right? We had some of the races that had developed like pretty much had good development with our Klingons and Vulcans and Romulans and the Federation and all of those characters. But then the Delta Quadrant, just this complete opportunity for them to meet entirely new species, and to get into entirely new dilemmas. So I think that was the great part of it too. I mean, you're right on the Deep Space Nine. There was a little even overlap in that first episode of The Caretaker, right? I think there's some scenes where they're on the DS9 station. Some of the crew members from Voyager. And
they
so
brought in the good show to kick off the new show. You know what I'm saying? Hey, but think about that though, right? They did that with DS9. They bring in the Enterprise and Picard to kick off DS9, right? For the familiar face. They do the same thing with Voyager, where they bring in Quark and the station as familiar faces, familiar setting to kick off Star Trek Voyager. So it kind of makes sense.
Actually, yeah, it does. It's a really good technique too to do that for sure.
They didn't do that in Enterprise. They didn't bring in, because Enterprise is set as a prequel to those series. They didn't do it then, but certainly an interesting way to, hey, we're going to bring in something new to kick off this new series, or something familiar to kick off the new series.
Yeah. Would have been awkward if they did that in Enterprise. If they found a way to do that, it would kind of be like, well, that was weird.
Like, wait a second, something doesn't fit here. Yeah,
that's excellent. So, I mean, I know in Voyager, like you said, it premiered January 16th, 1995. I think that was the kind of the flagship show that was supposed to launch UPN in its beginning. And I know there was so much anticipation with Voyager coming out. Even I'm sure there was pressure with the show creators on wanting Star Trek Voyager to be a success. And I know that they had wanted to bring back those themes of exploration that was similar to TNG. So that was great. A little, DS9 was on the station, and DS9 had a lot of conflict between the different factions and characters in DS9. And so, Voyager was completely new slate, a crew having to deal with the circumstances that they were there. So that was interesting.
And pressure of the fact that you have a series now with the first leading female captain in the franchise. We see other female captains in Star Trek and TNG in particular, with, Captain Rachel Garrett, I believe was her name, Captain the Enterprise C and yesterday's Enterprise. You had other higher up females. You had admirals like Admiral Nechayev and stuff like that. But this is the first time you get a leading, female captain, a female character being the I'd say the kind of the head of the show, right? Like the leading part of the show. So that there's certainly was pressure there, I would imagine. I can imagine the pressure that Kate Mulgrew as Captain Janeway must have felt stepping into those shoes. And we'll get it, I know Chris will get into that in a minute when we meet the crew. And yeah, there would have been some serious pressure there, right? To get it right and to make a good impression because you may, if you don't get it right early on, you may turn viewers away and the show may not be successful.
Yeah, absolutely true. But I think looking at it now, what a fantastic like overall job that they did, and what impact that they made into the Star Trek franchise. It was actually pretty amazing. Because Voyager, the diversity that is in Voyager. I mean, even the diversity of, having the captain as a leading lady, and then having as much diversity they had in the crew was awesome to see. So that's excellent.
Yeah.
What about the ship?
Sure.
Yeah, did you like the ship? I like the ship. I like the Intrepid class Voyager.
Yeah. I think
ship.
I definitely love
Yeah.
the Intrepid class ship. It's got this great combination of defensive nature. It's got the places to do your science and your exploration and things like that, but it's also equipped with an ability to defend itself. And it was very unique in the sense that the nacelles folded up. Like when it went into warp, then they would fold up and then it would go. I thought that was really a cool touch because you don't see that from a lot of the other ships you saw up to this point. They were all fixed nacelles versus this, which actually folds up.
Yeah, that's right. You've got
so great design.
You've got Voyager on your shirt. It's looking
Yeah.
good. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I know that Voyager also brought in a lot more CGI that had been used in the Star Trek shows before. So I think they did a really nice job of actually bringing in CGI. I know they still had some models, and they had that beautiful like opening cinematic scene with the opening credits, but strong use of CGI. And I'm sure we'll talk about some episodes down the line where they did use CGI. But let's meet the crew. Let's meet the
let's
crew
do it.
of. So we do have our leading lady and just a wonderful anchor of Voyager, Captain Catherine Janeway, played by Kate Mulgrew, our first leading female captain. Again, like Zach said, not the first female captain in Star Trek, but the first so critical leading captain and anchor of one of our Star Trek series. So she's a scientist, like extremely smart. We get to see some of her science acumen, I know, throughout some of the episodes, and it's really kind of enjoyable to kind of see her have that very, very analytical and scientific part, like alongside her command abilities. So that was kind of unique. Not something we saw, I think, as much in the other captains, but Captain Janeway certainly had that. So she is, interestingly enough, and I learned this not too long ago, but she was not the first actress to be cast as Janeway. So
right,
Kate Mulgrew was actually the second actress. So the first actress was Genevieve Bujold. I know she was an award Oscar nominated actress, and so
very accomplished actress.
Very accomplished actress. Yeah. So I think Genevieve Bujold, she worked just 2 days filming, and then after that she decided it wasn't for her, and the creators of the show brought in Kate Mulgrew came in and auditioned and became Captain Janeway. So that was wonderful.
Could you imagine Kate Mulgrew, the pressure she was under? I mean, think about that, right? She's mentioned this at conventions speaking. She might have mentioned this at the convention we were at in 2021. Was she at the convention that you went to? Oh, wait, no, I don't.
She was not. No.
Okay, never mind. I'm thinking of last year's 2022. She mentioned that, and she's mentioned that several times when I've seen her speak, that the pressure that she felt to come in and get it right, because she wasn't the first actress, right? She was coming in You already had some level of dynamics established amongst the crew meaning the actors and so forth. And so you had that dynamic built there, and so she's coming and stepping into a new setting, and she's got to nail it. She's got to nail it right from the get go in order for people to, the cast and everybody else to accept it, and for her to just take off and own this role. Because what's to say the same thing wouldn't happen to her, right? So I can only imagine the amount of insurmountable pressure. And she mentions too, I believe, I think it was the first time she was on the bridge and the first scene she was filming or something like that. I think some of like the bigwig executives were like off camera watching her to see how she was gonna do, if she was the right choice then, and everything like that, because they had to get it right. And she knew she had to go in and just nail her marks in order to make it work. And obviously she did, because she is Captain Janeway. So I can imagine the insurmountable pressure she had to have been under, to nail the lines and nail everything and to be that Captain Janeway.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I was reading a little bit about her casting experience, and she had said she had gone into the casting experience in that in the room, and her observation was like the vast majority of the people and the executives in there were all male, and and
Yeah.
and like one of the few females, if maybe the only female in there that was part of the casting was Jerry Taylor.
Yeah, wasn't she the
Yeah.
showrunner for Voyager? I think she was,
Yeah,
wasn't she?
yeah, and the kind of the mother, the creator of I should say the creator, I believe of Captain Janeway. So
Yeah.
near and Captain Janeway is near and dear to Jerry
That's
Taylor.
right. The
Yeah,
convention that you went to 2021 that we both went to, Jerry Taylor spoke on stage, I believe, and she kind of mentioned that, right? That she was kind of the mother of Janeway.
she did, and I had read that Jerry Taylor like felt because she created Janeway, she like embodied Janeway. So when when there was eventually like an actual actress to become Janeway, that was something of an adjustment that she had to go through, right? Because she was felt like she was embodying Captain Janeway and wanted to be Captain Janeway. But it's interesting when I think about that casting experience that would have happened in the '90s, and then the majority of the people involved in the casting, to be male, and to have just few females involved in that casting decision, but you're casting for a female captain. I can't
Right.
imagine that would like happen today. I would think there'd be a lot more diversity of thought. But
Yeah. It
but
was the 90s, man. It's a different
yeah,
time.
it was a different time. But
Yep.
yeah, but Kate Mulgrew just has done, I feel, just an awesome job of embodying the captainship, and embodying that character of Captain Janeway. I feel like she's just really bold, and she just goes 100%, and you kind of see that in Kate Mulgrew and Captain Janeway. I feel like she's an adventurer, um, kind of similar a little bit to Captain Archer, where I think they're both bold, they're both like adventurers. And I always felt when I was watching Voyager that Captain Janeway is always she's willing to risk. She's willing to risk things, willing to bargain. I think probably willing to risk things more than maybe, I don't know, maybe more than Captain Picard. You got to think about that a little bit, but
Especially in the later seasons of Voyager. Maybe not as much in the first couple seasons, because, and we'll talk more about this as we get
yeah,
into the first couple seasons. But I would agree with you. I think especially late in the later seasons, she absolutely was.
yeah, yeah. And you get to see her like adjust her kind of internal philosophies and ideals regarding Starfleet, like as she kind of navigates their way through the Delta Quadrant, and like how she approaches the Prime Directive in the Delta Quadrant.
Yeah. There'll be a,
Yeah,
there'll be a lot of those discussions throughout this 3-part look at Voyager that we do over the next, several weeks or so.
yeah, yeah. So I feel if there's a real life person that I would compare Captain Janeway to, maybe like Amelia Earhart, like is
Hmm.
what I was thinking. It's so
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I thought they're both really like bold adventures.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you mention her being similar to Captain Archer. I think you're right there. I would say, like, we've talked about doing an episode at some point where we do like a "Oh Captain, My Captain," right? Where we talk
Yeah.
about the 5 classic Trek captains and putting them in flipping them in situations, right? Like putting Cisco in the situation that Picard dealt with and vice versa, and talking about how maybe they would respond based on what we know of them and so forth. And that should be a fun episode at some point down the road. But I think that's a really good point you made, because I think personally, Archer and Janeway might have the most difficult captainship, if that's a thing, of all the captains, right? Because Archer's going out with his, crew, basically all human crew minus T'Pol, because she's the liaison first officer, eyes of the Vulcans, as they go out. But they're a ship that's going out in DA for the first time, first Warp 5 ship from Starfleet and all this stuff, because the Federation hasn't been founded yet. And they're woefully underprepared for what to go up against. They don't have shields, they have polarized hull and blah blah blah. Janeway, right, in Voyager, they're thrown 70,000 light years. They're at maximum warp. They're like 70 some years away, or it's gonna take forever for them to get home. They're all alone. They got nothing to help them, right? And so because of that, she's got to make a lot of really tough decisions that either challenge her core values, which are typically aligned with the Federation, obviously, as a Starfleet captain, and all these different things. And she's got to try to get her crew home, keep them safe. There's no one to help her from the Federation. I mean, they're really out there all by themselves. So if you ask me, her and Archer, and I think you brought this to a good point, they're willing to take risks and willing to bargain because they kind of have to. They have to do what they have to do in order to make it out alive and survive. So I think that's a great point you brought up.
Yeah. Because we're talking about this, just to spend a few more minutes on this, I had been thinking about this, and you said it beautifully, Zach. You said it beautifully. I was thinking about Captain Janeway and Captain Archer, about kind of being on two sides of a spectrum. So you have Captain Archer, he's still in the Alpha Quadrant, still kind of has resources, right? They have Vulcans as friends. They've got humans, but he's in this situation where there's no institutional knowledge or development of Starfleet, or a Federation, I should say, right? There's no no development of rules that he can go back to and look at to kind of guide his behavior or his choices in the situation. So he's making those like on the fly. But at least he can still he can communicate back home, and he can communicate with the Vulcans when they need help.
Would you compare Archer a little bit to like maybe Lewis and Clark?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that is a great.
Let me come out kind of my comparison, like that first out into the unknown.
Yes.
At least for humanity's purposes, because we know the Vulcans had gone out. They were way ahead of the humans, but I kind of would think, little Lewis and Clark maybe.
Yeah. Oh, that was perfect. That was beautiful. Yeah. So he's got that situation, and then Janeway, who has come from the Federation and Starfleet, and has come from all of that training in the academy, with all of those Starfleet like ideals and philosophy and training in the Prime Directive, like with her. Like, not only is she educated in that, but she's got it like literally like with her on the ship. But she's away from everybody, so she can't like call from help. So she's in the situation where, okay, now she's got all of this institutional knowledge and experience that she can refer back to, but she can't call for help. So I think like those are really interesting kind of spectrums, like them being opposite. And I think you framed it kind of beautifully. So that was good.
Yeah.
So now, so moving away from Captain Janeway,
and we could talk about Janeway. I mean,
No,
literally this whole episode, right? And we'll have opportunities to go back and talk more about Janeway in other episodes and things like that. But yeah, it's a good start there. Of first of her kind leading captain for this series.
Yeah, it was excellent. So we have our first officer, Commander Chakotay, played by Robert Beltran. And what was really interesting is he's not the traditional first officer at all. He is one of the what we call the Maquis, the yeah, he was a freedom fighter fighting against the Cardassians, and they happened to be, put together in this situation, and he became first officer on the ship.
Yeah, we learned a lot about the Maquis in the previous Star Trek series. Deep Space Nine.
In Deep Space Nine,
Anyways, yeah.
indeed we do. So he is the character of Chakotay is, from Native American ethnicity. Um, and what I was learning about when I was learning about that and how the writers wrote in his ethnicity and his background from Native America was I think they didn't choose it was general or generic, trying to represent all of Native American ethnicities. So it wasn't specific towards you know no towards one. So I think that was very interesting. And I think, yes, as far as I know, that as far as we both know, I think this is the first Star Trek with a Native American in the lead
Yeah. At least in the
in the
leading
lead.
position.
Yeah.
I'd have to think if there was maybe background characters or something that would have
Mhm.
been that way. It's kind of cool because I will say, with a Native American representation here, I am part Native American, so that's kind of neat to see.
Cool.
I may not fully look
Yeah.
it because I have several other stuff in me, but from what I understand, family genes and all that stuff, the biggest chunk of me is Native American. So it's pretty neat to
Excellent.
see that.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yep.
You know what I observed about Chakotay? I think we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but he's just kind of very, very calm. I felt like all the time. Uh,
Yeah.
just very, very calm, very steady. Like he's Captain Janeway's kind of strong right hand. Um, and you just see him like playing kind of this cool demeanor all the time. So I thought that was pretty neat to see how he kind of played that off. And he becomes, and I'm sure we'll get to this later when we do later episodes in Voyager 2. But I also felt for Janeway, um, he became Janeway's kind of conscience
Yeah.
after a while, right? So
Yep.
because Janeway, like we said, she's pretty bold. She's gonna take a risk, and she sometimes is on the verge of like doing a decision that might be questionable, and then he talks to her, kind of reels her back a little bit, says, "You really want to do that right now? Maybe maybe thinking about it a little bit." So yeah, I think he's a pretty interesting character.
I think he's a pretty good first officer.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, right, he was part of the Maquis, so he's part of the group of crew members that are being trying to be integrated into, the Federation crew members on board the ship. And so I think he does a good job of representing them while also trying to back the captain in order to maintain good order and discipline as a leader in this situation would, and as a first officer would. I think the character is written well enough, like you mentioned it perfectly, that he is that level-headed, that conscience, that really good first officer who does a good job of supporting the captain in front of the crew, and then behind the scenes is where he says, hey, I've got an issue with this, or you need to think about this, or you know what's going on, blah blah blah. And so he's got that really good balance, I think, of supportive first officer, yet he will challenge the captain at times on her decisions, but he'll do it in a respectful, private way. And I think
Yes.
that's really important,
Yes. Yeah,
especially
absolutely.
when you're 70,000 light years from home. It's like you all got to get along if you're going to get home alive, right? So,
Yeah, that's right. So I think it was the first episode, Caretaker.
mhm.
There's a scene in that episode where some of his fellow Maquis crew officers, they're complaining about something that's happening on the ship,
They complain a
and
lot in the beginning.
yeah, they complain a lot in
Yeah.
the bidding. And
Yep.
Chakotay says something along the line of, "You guys better stop that now, or else I'm going to court martial you." He fully backs the captain, in that circumstance. So I thought that was really good. So he set the line right there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Oh yeah. So moving away from Chakotay, we have Lieutenant Tuvok. So he is played by Tim Russ, and he is a Vulcan, full Vulcan. And he's got we learn later, but he does have a family. And it is a different approach to a Vulcan, right? He's
Yeah.
got a family. He's uh full Vulcan, and in terms of yeah, this was before T'Pol. So we had T'Pol was full Vulcan, but but this was the first time we had full Vulcan um on a Star Trek Classic Trek series.
Is I'm trying to think back, Chris, to the TOS movies, or even to Next Gen, any of the other shows that come before it. Is Tuvok the first African American Vulcan that we meet in the Star Trek franchise?
Yeah,
I'm trying to remember if there was an African American Vulcan at some point in the past, the other iterations of Trek.
I
I'd have
think
to
you're
go back and
correct.
look. I have to go back and look, I guess, because I don't remember. There might have been maybe in a TOS movie somewhere in the background, but I don't remember. So even if there was, he's the first, I guess, leading African American Vulcan, and I think Tim Russ plays him just perfectly. He's so good at that character.
Yeah, yeah, he is, and you could always tell like there was so Vulcans, of course they're supposed to control their emotions, but you could always tell like it's not that he didn't have there's emotions there, but he's in control of them. So I thought
Yeah,
he played that, yeah, like you said, he played that like really well, and you could see that.
yep.
Yeah, yeah, that's great.
And
We
and
do,
he
yeah.
has a history with Janeway too.
Oh
Him and
yes,
Janeway have a relationship, have a friendship going back because I believe they served together prior to Voyager, if I remember correctly.
yes, he knew her for 4 years. He says that
Yeah,
in season one. Yeah, where
yeah, that's right.
they've known each other for 4 years. So you're right.
Yeah. So they yeah. And oh, by the way, not to forget, I know I didn't put this in the notes, but um Tuvok was disguised himself as a member of the Maquis,
Yes.
and he played the Maquis once they got on board the ship, and they found out, oh, he was actually infiltrating the Maquis as a member of Starfleet.
Yes.
So that was an interesting twist. Like if you're watching Voyager for the very first time, right, when it's airing, and you think there's this Vulcan Maquis, right? He's like a rogue Vulcan, so to speak, or whatever. And then all of a sudden he turns on the Maquis and he's actually Starfleet, and you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming, because the whole Vulcans don't lie thing. So he clearly kind of did.
Yeah. What a twist for Chakotay, right? How would
Yeah.
Chakotay have felt?
Yeah, because Chakotay prides himself, I think, and we'll talk about this later,
Yeah.
on being able to read people and see
Hmm.
things coming. And he's very intuitive, and so when those kind of things happen, it really gets to him.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
He got deceived
he got
in a
played.
big
He got
way.
played.
Yeah.
Yeah, he got played
Yeah.
for sure.
He sure did. All right. Yeah. We do have Lieutenant Tom Paris as well, the pilot of the ship, played by Ravi Duncan McNeil.
Yep.
So he is brought on, he's got somewhat of a dubious past from some previous things that happened to him, that I think involved the Maquis as well. If I'm not mistaken, I think they might have involved the Maquis.
I don't
But yeah,
remember.
yeah, he was brought on board by Janeway by making a deal. She made a deal to get him out of a Federation penal colony. And his father is Admiral Paris, and Admiral Paris, I know he plays a much more significant role in the later episodes
Yep.
of Voyager. But
Played
if
by the great Richard Hurd. I got to meet him one time at a convention. He's passed away now, unfortunately. He also played George's boss for the New York Yankees in Seinfeld. Great actor. Was a very nice guy when I met him, and unfortunately he is not with us anymore. So,
uh,
but yeah, Admiral Paris certainly becomes a important character later on in the series as Voyager is trying to get home.
yeah, yeah, I do. I think Robbie Duncan McNeil, he played the part pretty great. Like he was in some early episodes of TNG too, right? He was
He played a different character
he
as a
did.
cadet. It was in that episode where they lie about the accident that kills one of the cadets with Wesley at the
Yes.
academy. Yep.
Yeah. So that was pretty
He was
interesting.
not Tom Paris in that episode, but he certainly looked like
Yeah.
Tom Paris in that episode.
Yeah, his
A
character started
younger
with an
version.
L. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Started with an L, but I can't recall
Yeah,
it.
I can't remember either.
Yeah. But he played in Voyager. I know he was pretty roguish, I think. And roguelike
Yeah.
character, kind of went his own way and becomes best friends with Lieutenant Kim. So that was kind of neat to see their friendship kind of grow.
Yeah, they have a great friendship on the ship. He's also the best pilot on Voyager too. It's
Hmm.
made numerous statements, and there's several episodes dealing with his piloting skills. He flies the ship anytime you see him on the bridge. He's at the ready. He's flying the ship around, And later on, we get in the series to talk about the Delta Flyer that they build and his kind of baby that they build up and his flying and wanting to, go faster than warp 10. All these different things we'll talk about as we go on in our look at Voyager. Yeah, Tom Paris is my favorite character in the series. I don't
Oh,
know
he is. Oh,
He
okay.
is. Yep, he is my favorite character from Voyager.
Nice. Well,
Yep.
cool.
Oh, we'll talk about that later. But yeah,
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
let's
Yeah,
continue. We got
yeah.
plenty more crew members to meet.
We have Lieutenant B'Elanna Torres, played by Roxanne Dawson. So she was also a Maquis, half Klingon. Ends up she and Tom Paris, they marry and they have a child in the last season or the final episode. We see them have.
Yeah, it's born in that last episode. It's I think that the baby's born right as they all of a sudden they come out of the gateway that's been destroyed behind them. That was a Borg gateway or transwarp gateway, whatever they call it.
Yeah.
They see Earth. Rise, they're getting ready to see Earth, and he runs back to meet his kid. Spoiler: if you've never seen Voyager before, now you know.
Yeah.
But yeah. I guess we're assuming if you're listening to this, you've probably seen Star Trek Voyager. I mean, it has been out long enough, so
yeah, it aired in 1995, so hopefully,
yeah, it's just a year or two ago. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the character of B'Elanna is like pretty interesting. We get to see her struggle, with like embracing both sides of her Klingon heritage and her human heritage. So that's very interesting. I think they do that very tastefully and very well in those episodes that they explore.
yeah.
So and a hot temper she's got, and she
Oh, jeez, does she ever? Does she ever?
Yeah. So, and she becomes chief engineer, I think, after the first couple episodes of the show. So that was great for her. And we've got Ensign Harry Kim, played by Garrett Wong, excuse me, played by Garrett Wong. So he is, I think it's pretty great. He's a leading Asian actor, and that means a lot for me too. So he follows in those same footsteps of Sulu. So that's great that happens. Leading Asian characters, I think in the 90s, in the early 90s or mid 90s. I don't know how prevalent that was. I don't have anything that comes to me. I have one show that I truly loved called Vanishing Sun that did have a leading Asian man, Russell Wong, which was awesome. But there's not that many others that comes to me.
Yeah,
So,
I can't think of many either.
yeah. But the running kind of joke that we even heard Garrett Wong talk about at the Star Trek convention is that he never gets promoted.
The whole show.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I don't understand how Lieutenant Paris can get promoted coming from a penal colony.
When he got promoted, then he got demoted, and I think he got promoted again.
Yeah. How's that happen? And then Lieutenant Kim doesn't happen. Anything happens
in 7 years. I mean, he's on the bridge. He's part of the senior staff, and you're telling me you never in 7 years he's just a lowly ensign for 7 years. That tells me he was doing something wrong, but you sure as heck know he was an integral part of that crew.
Yeah. Maybe his reports were always late. I don't know.
It could have been. Yeah, that paperwork will get you, man. That paperwork will get you.
Yeah. We've got the doctor played by Robert Picardo. He was cool, right? He's an EMH, the emergency medical hologram computer program, and he is the doctor. I thought Robert Picardo did an awesome job playing him. He was funny, and sharp, so he was awesome.
Yeah, we also see him as the EMH in Star Trek First Contact when the Borg first show up on board the Enterprise after it's gone back in time. Remember, and you got you got Nurse Agawa in there, and they and Crusher activates the EMH, and she's like, he's like, I'm a doctor, not a doorstop, and she's like, well, do a dance, do a jig, do a dance, tell a story, I don't care, but just give us a little bit of time, and then he's supposed to like basically. They just use the EMH in a way to keep the Borg occupied for a minute or two. But yeah, it's funny. So that he does show up in First Contact too.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
We have Neelix played by Ethan Phillips, and that's the first time we ever meet the Talaxians. And Neelix is awesome. I think
I love Neelix.
Yeah, he's great. He's the ship's morale officer, and the self-appointed cook. I think he removes the he takes it upon himself, right, to get in the captain's kind of dining area and turn that into his cooking area. So
Yeah.
that was great. Such warmth with Neelix. I always found he's very positive and always wanting to help him, and just very, very great character. He's who you definitely want to be around.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and you know he's very positive. There are times where he does get either angry or very depressed. I know there's one
Mhm.
episode we can talk about it another time, but basically where he I say he goes into a coma, or I think he almost dies or dies, something like that, and then gets brought back or whatever. Remember, and he's been brought up that there's this afterlife that he goes to where all his family's going to be there, and it doesn't happen, and so he's angry and bitter and upset about all of that, and then his whole beef early on with Paris over Kess, and his jealousy. He gets very super jealous about Kess, so there is a little bit that you
Yes.
see some of that. So he's not just a one-dimensional character, which is great, right? He has this this reputation as being that positive, warm character you want to be around, but they do show some other sides of him, which I think is great writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's not just one-dimensional.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you
Yep.
talk about Kess, and Kess is played by Jennifer Lean.
Yep.
And so she is one of she plays a new species, one of the new species characters in the show called the Okampa, which we
Yep.
meet in the very first episode here.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting. And yeah, a wonderful kind of interesting character like she is. I think she plays a species that only lives what, like 9 years, so
Yeah.
something like that. But they do eventually she does eventually leave the show. I think I can't remember after the fourth season or so, but they do write
It's
her.
I think it's towards the end of the third season because
Yeah.
Jerry Ryan comes in as 7 of 9 in season 4. I think it's at the end of season 3 is when she goes off the show, and I can't remember if it's because she started a family and wanted to be just raise her kids or whatever. There's a
Yeah.
whole thing with her we won't really get into about in real life about kind of going crazy and medication and all this stuff, but I think at the time I wanted to say something to do with raising her family,
Okay. Yeah.
but she
Yeah.
she played she played she played a wonderful Kess. I think Kess was so soft. She had an innocence to her. Um, there were so many great moments with Kess in those first few seasons that it really was sad when you get to that point where the character leaves the show. It would have been
Yeah.
nice if she could have stayed around the whole series.
Yeah, for sure. For sure it would have. That would have been nice for sure. And we do have seven. So you talked about seven. We do have seven coming in on season four, I believe, and that's played by Jerry Ryan. And she is a very, very interesting character, and she comes in like as a Borg and then coming back into human. And so that whole journey that she's got to try and unborg, if that's a word. Try and
Unborg, yeah, there you go.
unborg,
You
trying to
sound
be
like me, Chris. You're just making up words.
absolutely. So which kind of interesting, and she's kind of funny. And her relationship with the crew, I always thought funny, because she's helping out the crew so much, but when she's pretty directive in terms of if she needs help, she just calls out a crew member to say like Ensign Kim, report to room whatever. And she doesn't ask, and she does that with her like her superior officers as well. She says, "Come here." So it's kind
Yeah.
of funny to see that.
She's very socially awkward because, right,
Yes.
I believe
Yeah.
she was assimilated as a kid.
Yes.
So she didn't, I mean, she wasn't like a baby, but she basically her whole life's been a Borg. And so she's this idea of having to assimilate into her new life back
Yeah.
as a human being. She's incredibly socially awkward for probably at least a season after she's been deborged or unborged, as you say. Maybe she's unborged out there on the interwebs and the ether or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. Yeah. She could have. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but she changes over time. She grows, and we'll get into that as we get into the other parts of this look at Voyager, about how that transformation takes place and
Yeah.
what goes into that. So it's actually a really fun, kind of humorous, ironic thing that happens through all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. We've got episodes where she's mentored by the doctor, which are pretty funny. We've got
Irony.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So the you have
Being
the
mentored by a
hologram. Yeah.
hologram. Yeah.
Hologram is
Who
mentoring the Borg. Yeah.
exactly. Oh my gosh, it's great.
Yeah. I did read that. So I had read that the intent of bringing in the character of Seven was to try and have Seven be the Spock, kind of the Spock character to Janeway. So that was interesting. And the scenes, Captain Janeway's scenes with Seven, Captain Janeway has more scenes with Seven, I had read, than with any other character in the show. So that was pretty interesting.
I didn't
Kind of
know
see.
that.
Yeah.
I did hear too that they brought in Seven of Nine dressed the way she was specifically to bring in more male interest to the show.
Mm.
I've heard that at conventions. I heard that Kate Mulgrew wasn't happy about that, not because she had a beef with Jerry Ryan, but because she was working so hard to, progress her character and show this idea of a strong woman in a significant position, and that kind of felt like she was being undermined because of that. So there was some tension because of that.
Mm.
You know, whether you agree with it or not, that seems to be the running story all these years about why they brought in Jerry Ryan to play Seven of Nine. But the good thing about Seven of Nine, the writers I think did a good job of bringing her along. Maybe a little bit slow at first, but I think as she's adapting and learning and trying to become this new character over the course of the series, we see that change, and we'll get into later. Which I think is great. They don't just make her this one-dimensional former Borg that's just the way she is early on. I think
Yeah.
that was a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That's good. That's good.
But
So,
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I do find it interesting, Chris. You mentioned that she was brought in to be like a Spock type character when we already have a Vulcan on board.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. When I think about, since we were talking about this a little bit, Kirk is trying to help Spock find his humanity, like uh, like as Spock's friend, little by little, and Janeway is in her way is trying to help Seven find and rediscover her humanity and herself as a little girl too, like Annika. So that's kind of how I see it, and I always felt Janeway must have felt a bit like a mother figure to
Mm.
to Seven. So um
Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't
So
think of it that way. That's really good.
yeah.
See, this is why people tune into the podcast.
No,
You guys have such great insight.
no. Yeah.
That was no, that's good. I think that's probably a good point. It's a good comparison. I always thought of the Spock type character as
Mhm.
Tuvok because he's the Vulcan, right? Kind of that way. Maybe it's stereotyping against Vulcans. I don't know, but that is interesting that you bring that up. I think it's a good comparison. I didn't really think of in the past. So
Yeah. Interesting. We've got other notable crew members too, like
yeah,
Seska.
other people that
Yeah.
aren't considered main characters, but they're definitely an integral part of the crew that are around enough and make significant enough contributions to what's going on in the series.
Yep, we do. We've got Seska. She's played by Martha Hackett. I know she was at least prevalent in the first couple seasons, if I recall.
Yeah,
And she's a Maquis and she's a Bajoran, but then we find out that no, she's not a Bajoran. She's really, really bad. She's really bad. She's a Cardassian. So,
she
um,
goes from being a Bajoran to a spoonhead. I
yeah,
mean, my goodness,
yeah, that was interesting. And we've got Ensign Vorik. I think he's a Vulcan, right? He was.
he is. Yeah,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah. Good.
Alexander Enberg played him. He's a Vulcan for sure.
Yep, good. And we have Naomi Wildman, played by Scarlett Homers, and daughter of Lieutenant Wildman. That's right. Lieutenant Wildman was. She had a good amount of time in the show too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, she was I can't remember the species, but she has the little like horns on her forehead. Like there's like three little they're not like big horns, they're just little ones on her forehead when she's born. And then once the character's older, the actress who plays her has those on her forehead as well.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's Katarian, something like that. It's like her dad is Katarian and they have the horns or something along those lines.
That's right. We've got Lieutenant Joe Carey. So was he the engineer? I'm trying to recall which.
He I believe was part of the engineering crew.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And Ensign Hogan, and then some other folks. Michael Jones, who's a Maquis, and
Jonas, yeah, Michael
Jonas.
Jonas,
Ah,
yeah,
thank you.
crewman Jonas. He was a significant story arc in Voyager, right? Because we remember he starts sending secret transmissions to the Kazon and to Seska about the different systems on Voyager and everything like that. He starts selling out the crew. And they later discover that, and then something ends up happening. He ends up dying, but something ends up happening. I don't remember if he's thrown or he takes himself out or whatever it is, but he doesn't make it all the way once he's discovered as being a traitor.
Yeah,
So he was
yeah,
an
for
interesting
sure.
character. I definitely found like they took kind of like this semi background character that had a few speaking roles and turned him into a fairly significant piece there for several episodes. And so I think that was kind of cool by the writers to do that, to say, hey, we're going to take this crewman who's not a main character and make him an integral part of several stories that has a significant impact on board the ship as they're, dealing with the Kazon and dealing with Seska having already, two-face them, three-face them, whatever. And
Yeah,
went off with the Kazon.
yeah, yeah. That is interesting. That is interesting for sure.
Yeah, so you have two former Maquis who become deserters or traitors to the crew. And we know that Seska and Chakotay had a little bit of a romantic thing going on when they were Maquis, and he gets so irate and upset about it. He gets so mad that he got fooled, that Seska played him and he never caught on. He's so angry about that. So that
Yeah,
was an interesting little story arc there too.
yeah, yeah. It was. Yeah, because he's willing to sacrifice, I think, everything, right, to kind of right, right what happened.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, he just up and leaves the ship and chases after her because he
yeah,
he wants his vengeance. He's like, you're not going to get the best of me, and that's real. That's where you see that some of that level headedness of Chakotay just go whoop out the window. He's like, I don't care anymore. Like I'm gonna fix this. I can't stand the fact that I had the wool pulled over my eyes, so to speak.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And we'll get into that. But what's cool though, Chris, and like you mentioned this at the beginning when we were first started talking about Voyager, was that by going into the Delta Quadrant, right? We're in this whole new area of the galaxy. So many possibilities. DS9 had that with the Gamma Quadrant, partly because that was part of the show, but the rest of the part was the Alpha Quadrant. This show gets an entire quadrant to itself to explore, to bring new species and new stories and new conflicts and all sorts of crazy stuff to it. We get some really fantastic aliens. There are a few on here that I'm like, like I'm not real big on them, but we get a couple familiar aliens, and then we get several new ones that I think are fantastic. And like the Kazon, for example, they're kind
Yeah,
of like the recurring villains in the first couple of seasons. I don't know. The Kazon to me felt a little underwhelming. Like they had really big ships, they had really bizarre hair, and they had several different sects, SECTS, right?
yeah,
Different groups of Kazon. You had the Nistrum and all these other different variations of them, and they all kind of interfought amongst each other at times. I don't know. To me the Kazon, I wasn't. They didn't seem very scary or to me personally. I don't know what you thought about them, but
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was reading about the Kazon and how they had developed them, and they had this they had this idea of making the Kazon analogous to the street gangs, like from like street gangs in our metropolis or urban cities, like in LA, the street gangs that were there, and they wanted them to be younger, so they wanted like young aliens that were kind of street gangs. So that's why they had those different sects,
interesting.
SECTS. Yeah,
Yeah, I didn't know
yeah,
that.
and um, the younger actors that they had tried playing the Kazon just weren't as the quality of them weren't as good as the older actors, so they stuck with older actors playing the Kazon, um, and kind of didn't turn out like the way that they had originally envisioned, and kind of went away from the Kazon after a while. But yeah, that's what I learned. So you hit it like when they had the different groups of the Kazon, that's what they were thinking, these kind of different gang groups having conflict amongst each other. So
That's really interesting. We did get one episode with a young Kazon played by, rest in peace, Aaron Eisenberg, our one of our favorite Ferengi
Ah,
Nog
yeah.
from DS9. He played a young Kazon. There was an episode where he was trying to prove himself as an up and coming, I guess he would have been kind of like a teen type Kazon or something like that. It was an interesting episode. Yeah, they
Mhm.
were interesting. They just didn't. The Kazon never really did much for me from a recurring villain perspective, not like a Klingon or a Romulan or something like that. You had the
Yeah.
Okampa and the Talaxians, who we've talked about, right? Represented by Kess and Neelix on the ship, and I thought those were great. I think Talaxians are, in my opinion, an underrated alien species in Star Trek. I really enjoy the Talaxians quite a bit.
Yeah.
They're kind of a jack of all trades. They seem like they can do a lot of different things, and they're pretty peaceful species, other than the war they were involved with, where there was a lot of death and stuff like that. But they were a fairly simple, you know, intelligent, kind of laid back species in my
Yeah.
eyes. We had the Vidians. Now, I thought the Vidians should have gotten more time than they got. They got quite a few episodes early on, but I thought they should have gotten even more. The Vidians were the organ harvesters. They're the ones that would come in and literally take these scanners over your body and just pluck out your organs. I mean, they did that to
Mhm.
Neelix. They took his lungs. So I thought the Vidians were a really fantastic idea, and we'll talk about them here again in a bit when we get into the episodes of season 1 and 2. We got species 8472, the interdimensional beings that would just shred Borg cubes like they were tissue paper, complete CGI'd. I thought species 8472 was awesome. I thought they were a super intimidating. They had massive screen presence. Did you have any thoughts about species 8472? I know you're a big fan of the Borg too. So what were your thoughts when you first saw them for the first time? Yeah, that's kind of repetitive, but you know what I mean.
They were great because they were exciting and there was so much unknown about them, right? And then
Yeah.
if you have an entity that the Borg is afraid of and that
Mhm.
can tear up the Borg, you're like, wow, what is this? What is going on? And they came from this place that they called fluidic space. Fluidic, I think that's what they had at fluidic
Yeah, I
space,
think
which
so.
was kind of like, what is that? What is
Yeah.
this? And so, um, yeah, I thought that was a fantastic addition to have species 8472, um, because the Borg were already like, okay, so powerful. You're thinking, oh, if you have this other alien species that could just take out the Borg, that brings certainly a lot of excitement into the show. Yeah, and fear too. That was
Yeah.
great.
It we'll talk about this when we get into, like, I think season 4, what species 8472 did and how it forced Janeway to make a really tough decision and alliance with the Borg. In an amazing
Yes.
Scorpion Part 1 and 2 episode. Yeah, and speaking of Borg, we get Borg, and more Borg. Borg, the other white meat. Um, we get lots of Borg, and it's cool because people
Yeah.
love the Borg. We first introduced him obviously in TNG. You really didn't get much of anything Borg related in DS9, with the exception of some mentions of the Borg. And then Voyager just brings them to the forefront in many numerous episodes. Obviously, when they bring Seven in, that brings the Borg to the forefront in there, and they have a huge impact across what happens with Voyager and how they get home and all this stuff. The Devore were a real interesting species. They're the ones that patrolled around looking for telepaths. And if you remember, they had to stow away certain crew members on Voyager in places where the Devore couldn't scan for them or get them, and they'd have these patrols. And like the head of the Devore, like, really played Janeway to think that he was trying to um uh leave, and he wanted amnesty aboard the ship, and then he played her and this that, so they were an interesting couple episodes that we
Mhm.
we saw the Devore in there. The Dream aliens, they were another interesting one. I don't remember a whole lot about them. I wrote them down, but I didn't write anything
Mhm.
additional in there. We get the Ferengi again. We get an episode tied in there with the disappearing Ferengi from a TNG episode with a reference back to TNG. Um, the Herosian. Okay, the Herosian I was a fan of. They were later season 5 or 6 maybe in Voyager. They're hunters. They love to hunt species down, and they love the challenge, and they're these massive, brutal aliens that I believe, did they take control of Voyager at some one point?
Yeah,
I can't.
and
Yeah, I
and
think
the
they do.
holodeck too. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a very cool story arc, I thought. Hirogen certainly fit the bill of an intimidating, menacing um, villain. The Krenim. The Krenim might have been my favorite, guest appearance, alien or alien of the week, whatever. They had that. They were a part of the incredibly popular 2-part episode, Year of Hell, and they're the ones that are going through and changing the timeline. They're trying to change the timeline just in a certain way that I think brings their whole society back from annihilation or something like that. And they're manipulating the timeline and doing always little tweaks trying to do it. And they have this ship with the technology that can see the impacts. And it was a really cool episode. I don't know if you remember Year of Hell Part 1 and 2, but that was a cool 2-part episode.
Yeah, I do. That was pretty cool, and it was interesting. The captain, I think the captain of the ship at the time, his kind of his detachment, like from everything, like he was manipulating the timeline. But when you do that, you decimate entire species, and
Yeah.
all right, and they can never exist or they cease to exist. And he's kind of detached from all that, even though like he has a family. I think he had a family, or his family had perished in one of the timelines. So
I think that wasn't it one of the big driving forces behind doing it was to
yeah,
bring his family back
yeah,
as part of that. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, he was, Chris. He was cold and ruthless. He had zero feelings about anything. He's
yeah,
like, I'm maneuvering this, the timeline like a marionette puppet, and just until we get it just right to bring everything back the way it should have been.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. We have the Monians. These were the sea dwellers that were living on a complete water planet created by someone else. And I believe the technology or whatever that was keeping the planet like together, because I don't think it had an atmosphere. It was just water being held together, and it was starting to fail or something like that. And Voyager was helping them. That was kind of an interesting little one-off episode.
yeah,
And then the Trabe, they were a species you meet, I think, for an episode, maybe two, where they come in, you feel sorry for them because the Kazon have been hunting them down, and you think that they're on the run, and the Kazon, who the big bad Kazon. And then you learn what really happens, right? Where they actually at one point had enslaved the Kazon and
yeah,
hunted them down to the brink of almost being gone. And then the Kazon revolt and the tide is turned. And then Voyager learns all that. That was an interesting little story arc there. But yeah, those were a few alien
yeah,
species that really caught my eye. Not all of them are in the first 2 seasons, but as we're doing this kind of just brief overview of the show, I thought that it was important to mention some of those alien species that really stood out.
yeah, yeah,
Did you
absolutely.
have any additional ones that weren't mentioned that stood out to you?
I don't have additional ones. I will say the Vidians. Oh, I do have an additional one. There was, and I don't know if they were aliens or who had done it, but like a race of photonic beings, um, in there that the doctor connects to at one point. So I have to figure out which episode that was. But also the one that I think is really creepy is the Vidians.
Yeah, they're just gnarly looking, right? They're all
Yeah,
pieced together from different species trying to, survive the phage and all this. And I thought the Vidians were one of the most creative alien species that we've seen up to this point in the franchise.
yeah, they are. They are at the same time. They instill like fear. Like there's fear, and there's a bit of macabre and horror, like associated with Vidians.
Yeah.
But there's also
Yeah.
tragedy with them, and I think that the doctor develops at least a close bond with one of the Vidian females at one point in a couple of episodes. So yeah, a lot of a
Yeah.
lot of
I think
different things.
she's either there or something, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely the Vidians. Well, let's take a break, Chris. Let's get a break in here and get a word from our sponsor, Anchor.fm. We come back. We'll dive some more into Star Trek Voyager. We'll talk about the showrunner. We'll give some overall thoughts. and then we'll look at some highlights from season 1 and 2.
Excellent.
All right, we'll be right back right after this message. All right, we're back right here on the Random Redshirt podcast. Thanks for listening into part 1. And Chris, we're now gonna take a look into a few more details about Voyager and some thoughts that we've had as for the show overall. And then we're gonna jump in and talk about some of the highlights for us, whether they're good or bad as far as the episodes go. But we're gonna jump into season 1 and 2 and just kind of hit on a few things that stood out to us as this series kicks off and runs through its first 2 seasons. So I found a really interesting quote by the showrunner that you mentioned earlier, Chris, Jerry Taylor. I believe we actually met her at the Star Trek convention back in 2021. I think we had a book that she signed for us, which is awesome.
Yes.
I believe she was the first female showrunner in Star Trek. And I thought it was really cool, this quote she had. She said, when in regards to Voyager, she said, "We felt a need to create an avenue for new and fresh storytelling. We are forced into creating a new universe. We have to come up with new aliens. We have to come up with new situations." She also said, "We knew we were taking some risks. We decided in a very calculated way, to cut our ties with everything that was familiar. This is a dangerous thing to do. There's no more Starfleet. There are no more admirals to tell us what we can and cannot do. There's no Romulans. There's no Klingons. There's no Ferengi. Well, maybe one episode. No Cardassians, minus Seska. All those wonderful array of villains that the audience has come to love and hate at the same time will no longer be there. This is a tricky thing to do." So interesting quote she had there about the risk they were taking. You mentioned that, right?
Yeah.
Earlier in this episode, where we talked about, or excuse me, you talked about the risks that they were taking by doing the show this way, and I thought that was good. So you and the showrunner agree. Now I'm curious, Chris, what do you think? We have mentioned this when we talked about the other series. What do you think about the theme song of Voyager compared to in comparison to the other shows?
I love the theme song of Voyager. I think it's so beautiful, composed by Jerry Goldsmith. I mean, you juxtapose the theme song along with the beautiful like opening credits and the ship like, passing the planets and going through that gas cloud. Incredibly beautiful. I'm not sure which one is, again, I've been thinking about this, but of Deep Space Nine and Voyager, because Deep Space Nine is a beautiful theme song, like as well. So they are both Voyager and Deep Space Nine, theme songs are really, really, really up there. I enjoy those theme songs more than the TNG theme song for me. I think,
Really?
yeah,
The TNG is catchy, but the TNG theme song I don't think is original to TNG. They started using that song in the original series movies.
correct. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So they kind of recycled it. So it's not unique to TNG. I do think the TNG/TOS movie theme song is incredibly iconic. But I agree with you, man. The Voyager theme song is special.
Yeah.
The opening credits is special. All the ship flying around, like you mentioned, it's really, really good.
Yeah. It evokes, for me, it evokes this sense of wonder. Wonder, I think, is the word. I think that sums it up. Yeah, for me, it's just
Yeah.
I hear that and you just have this sense of wonder. I can't put it any better than that, I think.
It was perfectly composed. I
Yes.
think. I think that it's super, super catchy. I find myself every time I hear it humming it. I love the Voyager theme song and the opening credits in general. I think with between the music and the visuals are really spectacular. They did an absolutely amazing job. And my love for DS9, and those of you listening know me and my love fest for DS9. But I don't know, man, that Voyager opening and the theme song is really spectacular. So,
it is Voyager might be the best one. I'm thinking about like the visuals of it, and the theme song together.
Yeah,
I think it might be just the very best one.
it's really good.
Yeah.
I don't know that I disagree with you.
Yeah.
A big part of me wants to go, you can't do that. You have to say DS9. How dare you? I don't know, man. Yeah, that Voyager one's so good. So good. So, okay, well, let's just share some of our overall thoughts for Voyager, and then we'll jump into season 1 and 2. So, give me some of your overall impressions of the series as a whole before we jump into these first 2 seasons.
Series as a whole. Some overall thoughts as a series as a whole is I thought the series did a wonderful job developing friendships and relationships like amongst the crew members because they were by themselves in the Delta Quadrant, right? So you had the relationships between Captain and Chakotay, Captain and Seven, Seven and the Doctor, um, Tom Paris and Ensign Kim. So those kind of special because like they're exploring those things. So I thought those were wonderful. They had some as a whole. They had some really um, comedic kind of interesting episodes. You know that um, the holodeck episodes that they would have and kind
Captain
of the
Proton.
Captain Proton. You know those were really cool. The episodes where the doctor's exploring his humanity and you know learning to sing and sing opera. You know those are all funny.
Yeah, the is it the French bar or
Yeah.
place that they go to all the time
Uh,
for like birthday parties and hangouts and all sorts of stuff? Paris has like the pool games there, and I think that's where the doctor first starts getting into opera. He starts
yeah.
singing in there. Yeah,
Yeah. They were not Voyager as a series. Uh, I felt was very cinematic, and they were not afraid to have several kind of two-parter episodes. They'd have like these two-parter episodes in the in the middle of the seasons, like the Year of Hell, and they also had another two-parter where they went back in time to Earth. I forget the name of it, but it's in there. But
yes. Scorpion part 1 and 2. Yeah,
yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed those. Because they were trying to do as much as they could. Their use of bringing in more CGI to make things more cinematic, and then all of the Borg, you know, that I'm sure that we'll talk about later. So I really felt like they tried to make things big, and again, just like the premise of the show, tried to take risks. So a lot of those things I felt were meaningful. So I really enjoy Voyager actually. So those are some of my overall thoughts on the show as a whole. And then once we start getting into the episodes, that'll be fun to take a look at too. But how about your thoughts like as a whole?
yeah. I think you know, I have several friends who are Trekkies, several, and some like Voyager, and some like to you know talk smack about it. That's just, you know, everybody has their opinion, right? I'm kind of in the middle. Pardon me, I got fog in my throat here. I'm kind of in the middle. You know, Voyager is not my favorite series of Star Trek. If you've listened to this long enough, you already know what it is. I'm not going to repeat it because you're probably sick of hearing about it. But I kind of feel like with Voyager, Voyager to me is a show that is greater than the sum of its parts. Um, or I'm sorry, no, the parts are greater than the whole, or whatever the phrase is. Basically, meaning that there's so many things about Voyager I like, rather than like just the series itself, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like with Voyager, there's maybe a few more clunker episodes in Voyager than most series have. There's when I go through and rewatch Voyager, and I'm kind of doing that now, but it's more of it's not an every episode in a row thing. It's more of a, hey, let me pluck episodes out of seasons, mostly to, you know, prep for our episodes of the podcast. I find myself skipping certain episodes every time because I've watched them once or twice. I'm like, they're just not that great. I think the one thing that weighs Voyager down from being approachable for new Trekkies is that it's probably the most overloaded of any show with techno babble.
Mm.
meaning that they just make up a bunch of stuff like, oh, the Gerbenflugen and the this, that, and the other thing, and we do this with this and use this to and all these rando techno babble things in order to solve a problem. And that's been made known for a long time with the Voyager cast, that they had so much techno babble and they had to nail their lines. Like they had to say it exactly perfect to the T, because they knew that there are Trekkies out there that would call the show out if they didn't get the stuff just right. So, yeah, many people I know who are Star Trek fans who've said that they have a hard time getting into Voyager because of things like the overload of techno babble. I do think the series gave us some really, really amazing new aliens, like we talked about. That's for sure. We got to meet some incredibly new aliens, some that were only in one episode, others that were recurring characters. But in general, we got some really fantastic new species, new ideas. The Vidians, I think, were a fantastic concept. And we talked about some of those, in the first half of this episode. So those are some things for me, Chris. I'm not a hater of Voyager. I definitely like a lot of things about Voyager. But there are, some of those things I listed that don't make Voyager in my top 3 within the franchise.
I gotcha.
But again, doesn't mean I hate it.
Yeah.
It just means that, it's not in my top 3. But that being said, we kind of gave some overall impressions and thoughts. Let's jump into the first 2 seasons. Let's go through, let's highlight some stuff. Let's talk about some things that stood out to us in these first 2 seasons. We're doing the same kind of format we've done with TOS, with TNG, and with DS9 in our looks at those shows in the first 3 seasons of this podcast. So if you haven't gotten a chance and you want to go back and listen to those, our overall thoughts of each of those series, feel free to go back and listen to those one series per season of the Random Redshirt podcast. So take it away, Chris. Give me some highlights that stood out to you within the first couple seasons. We won't necessarily go just season 1, season 2. We'll just kind of mix it all together.
Yeah, well, definitely Caretaker is a highlight of the first season, right? Because that is the pilot, and that one gives us the chance to be introduced to all of the main characters, and we see Janeway, Captain Janeway. She makes this decision, and the decision, ultimately strands them in the Delta Quadrant, and so, which sets the premise for the show. So, and we get introduced to Neelix, and we get introduced to Kess as well. So, Caretaker definitely is a highlight of the show too. Some other ones
can I pause 1 second there for you?
Yeah,
real quick. How would you compare, like if you looked at, in the 4 series, we won't talk about the other series yet, just in the 4 series that we've talked about / reviewed and looked at on this podcast, of all the 4 so far, and I know TOS doesn't really have like a true pilot episode, maybe other than the cage. Looking at all the pilot episodes only for these first 4 series we've talked about, where do you think Caretaker stands? Does it stand up with the other pilot episodes, or is it just not as good? Like, what are your kind of thoughts real quick on this pilot episode versus the other ones?
Yeah, let me kind of refresh my memory on the pilot episodes. We encounter at Farpoint, and then this one, Caretaker, and then I'm trying to recall the Prophet. Is that the pilot episode for DS9? Trying to remember the name of it. It's escaping me, but I would say this. I think Caretaker holds up quite well to the other pilots.
Yeah, Emissary is the pilot name for
Emissary. Thank you.
From DS9.
Yeah,
you're close. Yeah.
I think.
You think it holds up?
I think it
stands with the other ones.
Yeah. It has the benefit of, like you mentioned before, it has the real strong benefit of some of the opening scenes are on DS9. So
I mean,
so
you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's got, and then when DS9 came on, right, there was a some interactive scenes with Captain Picard.
Yeah, Cisco wanted to punch his lights out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which so don't blame him. I mean, he blames him for the death of his wife. So
yeah. So I and I think it holds up well because it the pilot caretaker holds up well because parallel to Voyager coming out, you had some, I guess, world building and galaxy building in DS9 where you're learning about the Maquis in DS9 a little bit too. So when you go into Voyager, if you're familiar with DS9, then you kind of got some knowledge and background on the Maquis and what's going on, and so it's not like it's not cold.
Yeah.
Um, like Encounter at Farpoint was. Encounter at Farpoint was like this cold start, and so
Well, yeah,
uh,
and you have to think too, right? I mean, you're
uh,
talking about a brand new Star Trek series that other than the movies is taking place, 20 some basically 20 years or so after the original series
yeah,
TV show. I mean, because so it's all Star Trek, but the movies have a different feel and flavor than the TV series do.
yeah. Those are my
Okay,
sorry.
cool.
So I
Yeah,
wasn't
so
as
I
quick.
wanted to pause you there for I just was curious in your thoughts of Caretaker versus the other pilots.
Yeah, yeah. I had that. Uh, excuse me. Some of the episodes that I thought kind of were good to see, where there was a learning curve episode. We see Tuvok training the Maquis crew members, and I think those are good to see because you've got, at least you have to see some of it because you've got the Maquis relationship with Starfleet, so there's always going to be like conflict and tension there, and you don't want that all the time. But um, I guess how would you feel if you were a Maquis, one of the Maquis officers? How would you feel if you were one of the Starfleet officers? So you see that a little bit. I did like the episode. I believe this was in season one, called Meld. And this is where Tuvok mind melds with one of the Maquis crew members to try and control his homicidal impulses because that Maquis crew member was a murderer. So that was,
Yeah, that was an
yeah,
intense episode.
yeah, that was
Yeah.
intense. That was intense. And Tuvok kind of takes it upon himself, thinking, "Hey, I think I can kind of control this," but it has some very, very detrimental effects to Tuvok's mental well health too. So that one stands out to me. Another one that, for some reason, really stands out to me, with the early seasons of Voyager. I think this was in the first or second season, but it was Tuvix. Um, and I can't remember exactly which season it was, but
I want to say it was season 2, but
season two.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think so.
yeah, and that is another transporter accident that we've seen in Star Trek. They really have to fix those transporters, man. Man.
Yeah, you understand why Reginald Barclay's so scared of the freaking transporters. There's a reason for that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this. I definitely would not want to be the crew member that has to go back on the transporter after after an accident has happened and they say, "Hey, we fixed it. It's ready to go now."
Are you sure?
Yeah. So I think this would be interesting on the Tuvix one, because I think you and I, we've got similar thoughts on the Tuvix episode, and but very different thoughts too. Too. So I think it is a really a great episode. This one had challenges in writing. So this is where Neelix and Tuvok get in a transporter accident and they get melded together into one being called Tuvix. And I had learned that this was intended on being a comedy at first. So
It was
Tuvix,
certainly didn't end
yeah,
that way.
Tuvix as a comedic character, but yeah, it is definitely a tragedy. I think it is well done, like as a tragedy, well thought through. I think I learned that Brandon Braga was brought in to complete it during writing. Um, and at the end, Tuvix, ultimately Captain Janeway has to make the decision to end Tuvix's life so that she can get Neelix and Tuvok back. But you see this impassioned plea from Tuvix, desiring to live. And he obeys the captain to the end. She has his decision and he completely obeys like her decision. And she totally owns her decision and she has to be the one, to do the ultimate action to end Tuvix's life and get Neelix and Tuvok back. And she owns it. Not sure what other captains would have done in that situation, but it'd be interesting. but
We could talk about
hey,
that
well, we can
sometime,
talk
though.
about it. Yeah.
Episode coming to a theater near you.
Uh, yeah, absolutely. Tuvix gives this impassioned speech at the end, like I said, and that reminded me a lot about Shakespeare and the Merchant of Venice and Shylock, that famous quote, "If you prick me, do I not bleed?" And essentially that he wants to live. So I thought that was a terrific episode of Star Trek. So that,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Interesting.
those are some of that stood out to me. But
Hmm.
how about you? How about you?
There's definitely quite a few. I don't know
Yeah.
as philosophical as you, but
Oh, it's
yeah, I mean, caretaker. I mean, it's the pilot, right? I thought
yeah,
caretaker was pretty good. Okay, we didn't talk about this. We talked about the crew members. When we met the crew,
yeah,
right in the
yeah.
beginning, when you were going through that. I was thinking about saving it till the very end of our look at Voyager, but now I decided, okay, so we get caretaker, right? We meet all the characters. We're going through the first couple seasons. Why the hell couldn't the freaking makeup people decide what to do with Janeway's hair?
Yes.
She even mentions this. She's like, at some point, I think she said, "You guys just need to pick something and go with it." Like, because her hair was constantly, it's a running gag and it's a funny joke they tell all the time at the conventions. But yeah, it's like, make up your mind with their hair. Okay, anyways, off my rant. The phage stands out to me that episode in season
Yeah.
1. We meet the Vidians for the first time. They steal Neelix's lungs, and he has to be put into basically one of the main like bed chamber thing in sick bay. And the doctor comes up with a way to make holographic lungs, but he can't move. Like, he can't move at all. And then they have to figure out a way to, like, you know, create an artificial lung for him or something. But then I think he only ends up having one lung the rest of the time. Very touching, because Kess is super concerned, and it's a good episode. That's where we meet the Vidians for the
Yeah.
first time, and we talked about our like of the Vidians, the concept of maybe not like them is what they do, right? But Eye of the Needle, first time Voyager maybe has a chance to get home, but we find out it's a micro wormhole. They can't get through, and they end up communicating with this Romulan on the other side who's in the Alpha Quadrant. And then they find out at the end of the show that he actually they were talking to a Romulan in the past. So the messages that they communicated to him that he would supposedly take to the Federation would take, I don't know how many decades before they were actually delivered or whatever. It was kind of heartbreaking that they find that so late. Faces is a really interesting one. B'Elanna's split into two by the Vidians. There's a human and a Klingon version of her, and she has to deal with what all that means. And you see the different parts of her personality come out as a Klingon and then as a human who's very timid and shy and unsure of herself and everything else. And kind of an interesting look at personality and what makes up an individual. Yeah, learning curve, the season 1 finale where Tuvok's training the Maquis crew members. We start seeing the bio-neural gel packs begin to fail aboard the ship, which is another unique ship design for that series.
Yeah.
They have these gel packs throughout the ship that are required for the ship to operate correctly. So certainly a unique thing for Voyager, right, Chris? That, I mean, we didn't have that in the other series. So that's certainly something new they throw in there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Those are kind of cool.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just kind of a cool, interesting technology idea that they had for it.
Yeah, and they come into play throughout the series, right? When stuff happens, the ship's damaged, and the ship gets damaged a lot, and they go through a lot. Those bio-neural gel packs always seem to come up. Oh, the bio-neural gel packs are failing. We're all going to die, kind of thing. So certainly helps with the plot. You have Non Sequitur. This, I think, was an awesome episode. It's a Harry Kim-centric episode in season 2 where he wakes up in an alternate timeline where he was never actually assigned to Voyager. His buddy got assigned to Voyager, and he did not. And therefore, he is not lost in the Delta Quadrant. He's actually on Earth. So while Voyager is trying to find its way home, we get an Earth-centric episode.
Yeah.
That's a fun one, and it's a really good one. Kind of take a look at what Harry's life might have been like had he not been on Voyager. One of my favorite, probably from the first couple of seasons. A definite favorite from the whole series, actually, for me, is an episode called Twisted, where the ship goes through some type of distortion of some kind, and this, or not, this inversion field, and it begins twisting and changing, and the people start moving on the ship, and they start going to where they think they're going to go. They take the turbo lifts to like the bridge, and it ends up turning them up somewhere else, and it's this kind of this like maze episode, right, where they're trying to get her on the ship and they don't know how to get back, and really, really good episode. Really fun, kind of a little bit of a mystery type of episode. We get alliances where we meet the Trade. We talked about them, who are the ones that had originally enslaved the Kazon, and they're playing the victim card, like it's the, they should be helped because they're victims. The episode Elogium, I think, or Elogium, if I say it, whatever. Very, very tough episode to watch. So Kes prematurely starts going through the Ocampa version of puberty, but there's a small window that Ocampas have apparently where they can have a child. And they have to decide very quickly if she wants a child or not. Is she going to have a child with Neelix? Things move very quickly. Neelix starts questioning, does he really want to be a father? It's a look at parenthood. It's a look at what people go through as they decide whether they want to be parents or not, or if something is sprung on them, as a surprise, and they're not expecting to become parents, and they do. And so that's a touching episode. A lot of emotion there with Kes and Neelix, and the possibility of jumping into parenthood. Yeah, the Thaw, one of the worst episodes of Voyager, maybe one of the worst episodes of Star Trek. Very bizarre episode where they go into this dreamlike thing, and then you have like this just weird, like clowns, and weird ass episode.
I didn't remember that one at all. Maybe I gotta
Go back and watch it, Chris.
Yeah.
I think, go back and watch it. It's super, super bizarre. Like I just, it's one of those episodes that I skip. Remember when I talked about how Voyager has numerous clunker episodes that I skip when I watch through? That is on that list.
That's season 2 or season 1?
Season 2, I think.
Okay.
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's season 2. So yeah, go watch it. I think it's towards the end of season 2, but go watch it if you're interested to see how bad it is. It's horrible. It's Voyager's version of Move Along Home from DS9.
Yeah.
Just not, it's not whimsical. It's just bad. And then finally for me, and another one that stands out, and I really love this episode. I'm not 100% sure why. It's kind of whimsical in the sense we get this idea of Neelix beginning to settle into his role as this morale officer, and he's trying to do different things around the ship. And so he creates his own show on board Voyager. And it's all about having people on the show with him. It's almost like his own little version of a podcast, right? Where he has different crew members on. He goes around the ship and investigates and learns about different aspects of ship life and talks about them on there. He brings up juicy little nuggets about, romance, and it's just it's almost like a daily daytime talk show or something with Neelix, and kind of a fun, whimsical little approach to it. Paris pretends he wants to leave the ship in order to infiltrate the Kazon and Seska, and doesn't want anybody to realize it. It's very close hold that he's playing this part. Neelix finds out. He's very sad. And, we haven't talked a lot about the different relational dynamics amongst the main crew members. We can probably cover that later as we go throughout the series or at the end. But Neelix and Tom Paris don't get along at the beginning of the show, right?
That's right.
There's some jealousy factor there because, Neelix is very protective of Kes. He obviously loves her and is very, very, very jealous. You see a kind of a dark side of Neelix come out at times. And he believes at numerous occasions that Paris is trying to steal Kes away from him. And that kind of comes to head in a certain episode. And then this episode is after that. So at this point, they've kind of buried the hatchet. And there's even a moment where Neelix addresses Tom as he's getting ready to leave. And he says, I thought we kind of put all that bad stuff behind us, and I started to consider you a friend. He's like, yeah, no, we are, but this isn't for me. And then you find out that he was putting on this huge act because they believe, I think at this point, Chris, they believe there was some type of traitor or spy amongst the crew. They didn't know who it was, so they had to be real secret about this to get Paris off the ship to go after Seska, without this individual finding out. And of course, we find out later, of course, that it was, crewman Jonas, Michael Jonas,
Yeah.
is the one who's sending crap and everything like that. And there's another crew member as well that does some shady stuff too. But yeah, there were some pretty good episodes in the first 2 seasons of Voyager.
Yeah, I agree. They were good. They were good. It was
Yeah,
finding its place, and getting better and better and more creative, and
yeah.
yeah,
I,
absolutely.
I think in the first couple of seasons we got some good relational development. As we kind of wrap up our part one look at Star Trek Voyager, Chris, I'm curious from you, which out of the relationships that have developed thus far through the first 2 seasons of Voyager, which relationships, they could be romantic relationships or they could be just friendships, which ones amongst the crew stood out to you most, or ones that you liked the most?
Yeah, this one, what stood out to me the most in the first couple seasons was the relationship between Janeway and Chakotay, so captain and first officer. So I mean, it just happened to be that it was the Maquis ship that was destroyed, and Chakotay had to come on to Voyager, rather than vice versa, and Voyager that was destroyed, and the crew having to go on the Maquis ship. But as they kind of, so that's an interesting dynamic, right? So the first officer is, was who you were in conflict with, just like a couple hours ago. And so you've got to work that out.
Yeah.
But then through the first couple seasons, they also develop a very, very close bond. There's, you get the sense that there's some infatuation there on both sides, and that Chakotay, if Janeway provided the opportunity, then Chakotay would kind of embrace that. So that's kind of, you kind of had that, I think, in at least the first 2 seasons. I think they conclude that, and they kind of resolve that, and they put that behind. But that relationships between Chakotay and Janeway stand out to me, as an interesting one. So I'm curious, how about you? What have you got?
Yeah, I think that's a great highlight there with the relationship of Janeway and Chakotay, because obviously if they had written it to where the two of them don't get along or there's some issue that affects the whole crew, the first officer and the captain really have to be on the same page, and they have to be, supportive and have a good relationship. The first officer's got to be respectful and back up the captain. So it's a good highlight. I really enjoyed, and maybe this isn't as deep and philosophical, but I really enjoyed the Harry Kim and Tom Paris friendship.
Yeah.
I think that was a great friendship that develops. They as the show progresses, they go on the holodeck together. They kind of chase some of the same girls together. They have a cool friendship. I really enjoy their friendship quite a bit. I I like some of the not quite friendships, more like standoffish relationships between like Neelix and the Doctor, and especially Neelix and Tuvok.
Mhm.
How Tuvok, you can tell, just kind of like tolerates Neelix, and Neelix just wants to be friends with excuse me, Mr. Vulcan. Those are pretty cool. Obviously Neelix and Kessa's relationship, it's Neelix cares deeply for her. He's very sweet and kind and thoughtful with her. Obviously, the jealousy side comes out, and it's a not so pretty side of Neelix. But there's a lot of good relationships that I think Neelix is centered around in the development of that.
Yeah.
I would say thus far through the first 2 seasons, I think Ensign Kim and Lieutenant Paris's friendship is probably one of the ones that I like the most.
Nice.
I think it's fun, it's enjoyable. You're like, yeah, I could totally buy into this idea. These guys become two buddies. complete different walks of life, right?
Yeah.
You know, Ensign Kim's this stand-up Starfleet officer who's has some brilliant engineering to him. And then there's this like rogue dude who is in a Federation, you know, rehabilitation penal colony thing. And he comes on board Voyager to kind of get out of his sentencing. And they come from different walks of life. You know, Tom Paris has an admiral father, and so it's a little bit of the Odd Couple,
Yeah.
you know, in that regard. So it's a fun friendship. It gives me reminders of like Bashir and O'Brien, that kind of fun, you know, two buddies hanging out kind of thing. Certainly enjoy that. And there'll be some other relationships that develop later on in the show that we'll discuss that I really enjoy quite a bit as well. So
Nice.
yeah,
That was
that's
excellent.
mine. Yeah. So, well, I think this is a good place to stop, and then we'll come back and do part 2 of Voyager at a later time. So be sure to stay tuned for that, where we'll dive into seasons 3, 4, and 5 of Star Trek Voyager, and talk about some of our highlights there, some different things that are developing as we get into those seasons. There's going to be a lot of changes on the horizon for the show with characters coming and going, and I think Janeway might make some of the biggest changes as we go into the show. I think the first 2 seasons, as we've seen here so far, to me, she's too rigid. She's too much obsessed with the idea of having to do everything Starfleet related, and not willing to flex much in order to do what's needed to get her crew alive and home. And we'll take a look at how this changes in her over time as we go into the next few seasons, along with obviously the development of the other characters too. The Doctor has an amazing story arc, being this just computer program and developing into a full-on fledged sentient life. But lots of good stuff to come in the next part. But coming up soon, to give you a little bit of a tease here for those of you listening, we are going to be on with a strange new pod and their Captain Picard Week, their podcast festival, Chris, coming up. So we're going to be recording an episode for them, and that will be airing on Saturday, February 11th, I believe it is, on YouTube. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We will post, of course, links and everything else for you guys to be able to check that out on our Instagram and Facebook page. Speaking of that, be sure to go on Instagram and Facebook and follow us there for all the latest content here on the Random Red Shirt podcast. And of course, our, you know, pretty much newly created YouTube channel. If you're watching us, then you're already on the YouTube channel.
Yes.
But if you're listening to us and you want to see the video version of this episode, be sure to go check out our YouTube channel. You can just search us on YouTube at the Random Red Shirt podcast, and you'll be able to find us there. It's fairly new, so we don't have all of our episodes there. We only have the video recorded ones that we've done, and lots of amazing stuff coming. Oh my gosh, Chris, the next few weeks for us are going to be jam-packed full of some amazing opportunities, content, and potential significant guest appearances.
Yeah, it's going to be, we've got quite the schedule, and it's going to be incredible. It's going to be a lot of fun. So it's going to be terrific.
We're looking forward to it. And if you haven't listened to our episode with Erica and Mark from the Shuttle Pod show, be sure to go check that out as well and get some more insider info on what's coming here in a couple of weeks down in LA, as well as some more info on the Shuttle Pod show itself. And we'll talk more about that with them on the previous episode. So go listen to that and be sure to check that out. And yep. Lots of good stuff coming soon. We'll be back with more Voyager soon as well. And we look forward to bringing you more amazing content coming soon. So this is great, Chris. It's awesome to jump into the 4th installment in the Star Trek franchise.
Absolutely, Zach. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening so much. We really do appreciate it all over the globe and the interwebs, as Chris says. We very much do appreciate you listening. We are very thankful for you. And we hope you're doing well. And we look forward to talking with you more right here on the Random Red Shirt podcast.